Good evening. My name is Sylvia Barak Fishman. I'm a professor of contemporary Jewish life at Brandeis University and also co-director of the Hadassah Brandeis Institute. I'm also very pleased to identify myself as a board member of JOFA. JOFA, as most of you know, has a mission of expanding the ritual, spiritual, intellectual, and political opportunities for women within the framework of halacha. JOFA serves as a resource for those seeking advice, support, or information regarding the role of women in Orthodoxy. JOFA advocates for meaningful participation and equality for women in family life, synagogues, houses of learning, and Jewish communal organizations to the full extent possible within the framework of halacha. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Mark Trencher, the author of the newly released Nishma profile of modern Orthodox Jews. Many of you have read about it, and now we have the exciting opportunity to hear about that study in detail from the researcher and author. After retiring from his business career, Mark Trencher started Nishma Research, a sociological and marketing research firm focused on the Jewish world. He was the lead researcher in two recent studies that were each the first of its kind. A 2016 study of people who have left Orthodoxy, both Haredi and modern Orthodox, and the 2017 study of the modern Orthodox community that we're going to hear about now. He also did a JOFA member survey in late 2016 and presented the findings at the most recent JOFA conference. I'll ask Mark to begin briefly by defining his target research population and telling us a little bit about the project. And then he'll spend most of his time presenting and analyzing his findings. Mark knows that many JOFA participants are especially interested in issues like how do modern Orthodox Jews as a whole group and in subgroups feel about the broad issue of women's participation and women's leadership in public Judaism, especially scholarship and worship, and also how modern Orthodox Jews say they feel about modern Orthodoxy and how well modern Orthodoxy juggles halacha and secular Western liberal society. After Mark's presentation, we'll also have time for a few more questions. So Mark, take it away.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Sylvia. So as Sylvia mentioned, the genesis of this research was in fact the JOFA member survey that we did in December 2016. So that survey probed into the attitudes in such areas as the importance and satisfaction of various synagogue shul policies and practices affecting women. After that survey was done and was presented at the JOFA conference about a year ago, so I was talking in shul, at my shul in West Hartford, Connecticut, with a gentleman about the need to kind of expand beyond that narrow focus and to expand it in several ways. First of all, we need to research not just the people who were on the JOFA membership list, but really we'd like to find out the attitudes across the entire spectrum of modern Orthodoxy. And then we decided that we needed to go beyond the focus on the shul, but there were many, many issues that affect modern Orthodox Jews in America. Many of them are related to the role and status of women, but many other issues affect our broad lives as modern Orthodox Jews. So that's how the study came about. The target population is the American modern Orthodox community, which I will identify momentarily. Now, the question is, how do you reach enough people to do a legitimate survey? So everyone talks about the Pew survey, which is basically the example of a survey of the Jewish community that's done well. Pew made over 75,000 telephone calls in reaching the Jewish community. Does anyone know how many modern Orthodox Jews they surveyed? Well, it was 154. So with 154, you can draw some conclusions. Your plus or minus standard deviation, or however you want to refer to it, will be pretty large. But what you cannot do is you cannot drill down very well and look at men versus women, older versus younger, centrist Orthodox versus liberal modern Orthodox, because all those groups are pretty small. The other thing that Pew did not do is their survey really focuses on issues that are relevant to all of American Jewry. And as you'll see, the issues that modern Orthodox Jews are thinking about are much broader than that. So we decided we needed a survey that was going to reach a larger population with questions relevant to them. So how do we reach several thousand modern Orthodox Jews? In fact, the American modern Orthodox Jewish population represents 0.1% of the American population, and only 4% of the American Jewish population. How do you find these people? We decided that one thing that's pretty much standard among modern Orthodox Jews is a membership, or at least an affiliation with a synagogue. So we were very, very happy and delighted that the RCA, the Rabbinic Council of America, agreed to notify all of its member rabbis, several hundred, of the survey, and to encourage these rabbis to send information to their members. And through that process, and also we had about 30 shuls that came to us with an interest in participating. We ended up with close to 4,000 participants. The goal of this research from the beginning was to do this for the first time, to probe the attitudes of the modern Orthodox public and to share it widely, non-judgmentally, in a quality research project among the modern Orthodox community, leadership, rabbis, educators, etc. So I'm going to show you, let me just go through some of the key findings. I'm going to put this up on the screen. Okay, I assume you can all see this now. Okay, so incidentally, this is some of the material I just went through in my discussion, but you see the last bullet here. If you go to nishmaresearch.com, you will see this presentation that I'm presenting tonight and a lot more. You'll see the full study, you'll see a summary of the study, press release, many articles that were in various newspapers, as well as some additional articles in the Times of Israel, which I drafted based upon this research finding. So to start, what is modern Orthodoxy? You can see here the standard definition of modern Orthodoxy is we define ourselves as the branch of Judaism that seeks to synthesize traditional Jewish beliefs, values, and observance with participation in the secular modern world. And in defining the term modern Orthodoxy, it was interesting to realize early on that people don't all see the term the same way. So for example, I went to one woman who's clearly modern Orthodox. She's not Hasidic, she's not Haredi or Yeshiva, she's modern Orthodox. And she said, I am not modern Orthodox because I cover my hair or I don't wear pants. So it became clear to us that there's actually a spectrum across modern Orthodoxy. And as you move to the right, there is a view, and perhaps it's based on the word modern, that modern Orthodoxy is more liberal. That may be where the term centrist Orthodox came from a couple of decades ago. So in the survey questionnaire, we refer to it as modern or the centrist Orthodox. And here you can see the actual question we asked, which basically divided the respondents into all these groups: modern or the centrist Orthodox, Yeshivish or Litvish or Aguda, or sometimes known as Black Hatters, the Hasidic and the Chabad, or not Orthodox. All of these people were asked questions in the survey. They were not all asked the same questions. For example, the people who were not Orthodox were asked, do you go to an Orthodox synagogue? And if they said yes, we asked them some questions as to why that is. In the appendix to the study, there are some statistics for the Yeshivish and the Haredi, the Hasidic Chabad groups, but the report itself focuses on the 3,903 respondents who identified as modern Orthodox or centrist Orthodox. as we went through the survey, about halfway through, we asked a second question in terms of the self-identification, which I show you here. And that question is, you indicated you are modern, Orthodox, or centrist. Within that group, which of the following labels best describes your personal approach to your Judaism? And we divided modern, centrist, Orthodoxy into 5 groups. We said, are you open Orthodox, liberal modern Orthodox, centrist Orthodox, or are you right-wing centrist Orthodox tending toward yeshivish? So a couple of observations. First of all, 93% of the respondents were able to pick one of these. We didn't define them any more than with these words, but 93% were able to look at these 5 categories and say, yes, I am that, I am that. Open Orthodox has been defined to a large extent as a movement. Their ideology has been defined. Liberal modern Orthodox is just an adjective, adjective liberal, and modern Orthodox is a traditional term. The term centrist Orthodox has been kind of defined. It was first created by Rabbi Lamb at YU as reflecting kind of a Torah-oriented, non-liberal modern Orthodox. So among the 7% who were not able to pick one of these categories, most of them said, I am a mixture, or I'm all of them. Some people said I'm all of these, which kind of I don't really understand. But some of them said I'm a little bit modern Orthodox, a little bit yeshivish, a little bit Hasidic. And quite a few of them said they didn't like the idea of categories. What's interesting to see here is that there really is kind of a bell curve. So about a third are left of center. You got 41% that are in the center, and 1 in 4 is the right of center. So there really is, so modern Orthodoxy really has a wide spread in terms of how people define themselves. And I would say that American modern Orthodoxy is more heterogeneous. That means a greater diversity within our small 4% of Judaism than any other group in Judaism. That's my opinion, and we can talk about that. But I think if you look at other groups, they're more homogeneous, and some of the results in this survey will show that. One of the interesting things that we found, because tonight's presentation will talk to some extent about differences between men and women and the role and status of women and perceptions relating to that. And there's a lot more in the survey, but we're going to be spending a fair amount of our time on this topic. It was interesting to me to notice that if you go across the denominations, the ratios of men to women who self-identify is different. So in the open Orthodox, liberal modern Orthodox, for every 100 men that said I am in these groups, 115 women. So it's about a ratio of 8 to 7. And that doesn't surprise me, because I would imagine that there are women tend to skew more liberal because of the importance of the issue of the role and treatment of women, and the liberal groups do tend to be more favorable to women in that area. Modern Orthodox was closer to 50-50, 90 women for every 100 men. In the United States overall, there are 105 men for every 100 women. But then what I found to be quite surprising, if you go to the right, you've got 100 men, 71 women for every 100 men, which to me is just really odd. So I wonder why that is. Does it really reflect the fact that the women on the right are skewing leftwards? Are there in fact families that are centrist, where the husband might say he's centrist Orthodox, and the wife might say she's liberal modern Orthodox? Could it be response bias because we went out through synagogues? Could it be that on the right, fewer women either saw the email from their rabbi or heard the announcement or responded? I don't know. I just point this out as kind of something that I thought to be kind of interesting. So very early on in the survey, we asked about beliefs and practices. And we asked a series of questions. The Pew survey asks a lot of questions about beliefs and practices. We asked the few that we thought kind of give a good feel for where people stand in these areas. And this is a representative sample of some of the questions we asked. So looking at modern Orthodox beliefs, the question was, to what extent do you believe that Hashem created the world? 74% believe fully, and 90% believe fully or tend to believe. To what extent do you believe Hashem is involved in the day-to-day activities of the world? 51% believe fully, 76% believe fully or tend to believe, and that the Torah is what was written at Sinai, 64%. And people have looked at this and said, wow, those numbers are low. So I would say, first of all, that these numbers are actually quite comparable to the numbers that the Pew survey, based on a smaller sample, came up with. And if you look back at surveys over time, I think this is kind of really not that different from the historic trend. So for those who think that beliefs have always been in the 95% plus range, it's kind of a reminder to us that there are a fair number of people who kind of tend to believe. And so if you look at it that way, if you add together the believe fully and tend to believe, that maybe gives you a better picture of the beliefs. In the second chart here, we asked about practices. How observant are you? So Shabbat, 65% strictly observant, 91% strictly or mostly. And keeping kosher, 66% strictly observant, 95% strictly or mostly. You know, we didn't ask some of the kind of questions that Pew asks about kosher at home versus eating out, or to what extent will somebody eat out in a vegetarian or vegan restaurant. You can get into a whole survey on kashrut as well as Shabbat practices, but we just asked high-level questions. In terms of putting on tefillin, this question was asked of men, 62% strictly observant, 73% strictly or mostly. So the 27% are either somewhat minimally or not observant. We will see later that the area of tefillah has some very mixed feelings and opinions. The Harat HaMishpacha, the family purity halachot laws, this was answered by all the married people. And you can see here 58% strictly observant, 80% strictly or somewhat observant. I don't know what's going on here.
Mark, I think you have to click share screen because not everyone can see the screen.
Okay, there we go. Can you see the screen now? Hold on a second. Can you see it now? Okay. In looking at men versus women, it was very interesting and fascinating to see that across all of the beliefs and across all of the observances, they're really the men and women responded almost identically. I have heard it said, and I'll show you momentarily, that there is some disillusionment in some areas among women. There was an article which I'll show you about women checking out of modern Orthodoxy, but at least in terms of beliefs and observances, that we don't see that. So the beliefs and observances of men and women are virtually identical. We did ask a question about, there's a theory that Orthodoxy is moving to the right, and we did ask people, has your personal level of religious observance changed over the past 10 years? And the answer is yes, it has. And yes, modern Orthodoxy is moving to the right. 39% say they have become more observant over the last 10 years. And 23% said they've become less observant. 38% no change. If you compare the two numbers, if you compare 39% more observant and 23% less observant, and you do the math, then you end up with what I would categorize as a 16% shift over 10 years in people moving towards more observance. What I say is moving to the right. That's kind of a vernacular term that people are used to. So we could say that modern Orthodoxy has moved to the right by 16%, if you know what I mean, over 10 years. Looking at men versus women, there is a difference. So the men, more of the men became more observant, 41% more observant, 37, we commit to 37% of women. And more of the women have become less observant over 10 years, 25 versus 20. So in the end result, the men have shifted to the right by plus 21%, the women by plus 12%. And so that kind of makes sense as the issue of the role and status of women has gained more traction over the past decade. It may well be that that women are gravitating towards that. You know, I don't know whether thinking that's an important issue would manifest itself by someone's having the personal view that I've become less religiously observant. I mean, to me, I can accept that view and think that I'm just as observant now as I was. I've just changed my views. So I'm speculating there. But in terms of numbers, the women have shifted to the right, but less than the men.
Excuse me, at the bottom of your screen, you should see a little green icon that says share screen.
Right, I've been clicking that. Right. Now, can you see my desktop?
No.
Oh. Let's try that again. Can you see it now?
Yes. Yes, now I can see it.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you.
That's good. I apologize. Okay, is that good?
That's
Okay.
great. Perfect.
So I may have been talking without the slides for a while.
You were.
Oh, okay. This is the article that I was referring to. This is an article by Miriam Gedweiser in Forward. I spoke to her on the phone. She and I talked about this issue, the fact that the perception that modern Orthodox women are checking out. Very early in this study, we interviewed a number of women because the interviews are important to kind of frame the language around the survey. And from those women, I did hear a lot of disillusionment, sadness, some anger. So the article itself did not surprise me. The theory that modern Orthodox women are checking out doesn't surprise me. The question is it true? So we decided to ask, how important is Orthodox observance as part of modern Orthodox life? We wanted to get at how important is their orthodoxy to these people? And we really were playing around with a kind of a sophisticated question because all of us are members of society, we're humans, we live in the United States, we may have spouses, we may be parents, grandparents, we may be children of living parents, we may be professionals, doctors, lawyers, teachers, and modern Orthodox Jews. A very sophisticated question might be, how important is your being a modern Orthodox Jew as part of your overall persona? How does it compare to your being a doctor, a healer? How important is it to you compared to being a spouse or an American or a participating member in society? And after playing around with this question for a while, we decided it was just so complicated and we just really we couldn't figure out how to frame this properly. So we decided to ask a simpler question. And the question we asked was, on a scale from 0 to 10, 0 equals do not agree, 5 equals somewhat agree, and 10 equals fully agree, to what extent do you agree with the statement, being an Orthodox observant Jew is an important part of my life? And as you can see, 57% said 10. That's a pretty strong rating. Another 16% said 9. So 73% gave it a 9 or a 10. The average rating overall was 8.9, which if you're familiar with ratings on a scale of 0 to 10, you know that 8.9 is a pretty strong rating. If this was a movie on the Internet Movie Database, we would be among the top 10 movies all time, just above Schindler's List. We would be the 6th greatest movie ever made with a rating of 8.9. American modern Orthodox Jews feel that being an Orthodox observant Jew is important. 73% say it's extremely important. Another 18% say it's moderately important. In the business world, when questions like this are asked, ratings of 6 to 0 are considered detractors. They're people who are not connected to whatever it is you're asking about, whether it's a product or service. In thinking about this, we often try to figure out who is at risk of leaving Orthodoxy. When we did our survey of people who left Orthodoxy, OTD or off the derech, people said, well, what percentage of modern Orthodoxy are at risk? And we really don't know because it's never been surveyed. But if you consider that people who answer 6 or less to this question, it's just not that important. You could say that 9%, that's the group that kind of is at risk. So I'm just speculating and giving you a number that I think kind of has a little bit of attitudinal validity to it. I will show you momentarily that these ratings for men and women were virtually identical. Where we did find significant differences are among the 5 groups. And as you can see, the open Orthodox, liberal, modern Orthodox, 53% gave it those highest ratings of 9 or 10, and it went up quite a bit to 92%. So the importance of orthodoxy and observance definitely rises as you move to the right. Looking at the men versus women, you can see that those graphs are virtually identical. The average rating for men was 8.93, for women 8.96. So the distribution and the averages are statistically identical, by which I mean there's no statistically significant difference between men and women. So the hypothesis that women are checking out, if it's true, it may well be limited to a small subgroup of women, but over the entire spectrum of modern Orthodox women, they're not checking out. Men and women see the importance of the Judaism as approximately virtually the same. And then why be Orthodox? So we asked a follow-up question, trying to really understand what is it that people, since it's so important to them, what is it that people value the most about their Orthodox Jewish observance? And the question we asked is, what gives the most satisfaction, joy, or meaning to your life as an Orthodox observant Jew? The theory being that Orthodoxy is important. Why? Because it gives them the things that are important to them. And these results I found were kind of interesting, several areas. First of all, by a very wide margin, mentions of community and sense of belonging. These are mentioned much more than anything else. By the way, these are multiple responses. It was not a checklist. People were just given a box where they could type whatever they wanted to type. And some people typed just a few words. Some typed paragraphs and paragraphs. And at the website, you will see 73 pages of verbatim comments. You can read through exactly what people said. In answer to this question and an answer to a parallel question, you'll see later about what is it that gives them the most unhappiness or pain. So those 2 questions are both presented in that document, which you can see. There's a lot of overlap. Shabbat was mentioned a lot. Shabbat, family life, time togetherness on Shabbat, together with their children, with their grandchildren, their observant children. 19% mentioned connection to Hashem, service of Hashem, kind of a strong theological element, and 18 like the learning and shiurim. Then there's a drop below that. Davening, tefillah was mentioned by 9%, shul attendance by 9%, and you can see, so there were actually many things mentioned. With 3,000 people responding to this question, categorizing it was definitely fun and challenging. Again, men and women, in terms of the things they mentioned, were virtually the same. I would point out that women did mention community a bit more often. So community was the number 1 thing mentioned, and women actually mentioned it even a bit more often than men. Just to give you a feel for some of the sample comments, why be Orthodox? I think community is what gives me the greatest happiness. Community, being around other like-minded people who share a Torah lifestyle together is where it all starts. The strong family values and lessons for children, the forced breaks, talking about Shabbat. The next comment, seeing the children follow in the Orthodox tradition, raising the grandchildren this way. There were quite a few comments about the continuity and transmission of our values. Finally, I love my religion and community. I am blessed to be able to raise my children in such a committed community, both synagogue and schools. I should mention that there's a whole series in the survey about schools, about people's perceptions of their children's Orthodox Jewish day schools, which is not included in tonight's presentation, but it's one of the important topics that's in the report. One more page of being part of an observant community, again, community, Shabbat and Chagim and Smachot are celebrated with joy. Trying to be a better person, including relations with others, acting ethically according to Jewish Orthodox values. I'll talk a bit more about that in a little while. I feel I'm making the world a better place by being an Oved Hashem, a servant of God. And then again, being part of a community that will help one another. So that's just a sample of the comments. So this survey's gotten a nice amount of traction and coverage in the media. The New York Jewish Week called me and they said they wanted to do an exclusive release, to release it first, which I thought was great because they have a nice readership. So this was released on their website, and that's what was released. So this is the article that first came out on their website, which was on a Tuesday or Wednesday before the print edition a few days later. 53% of modern Orthodox Jews believe women should have expanded roles in clergy. Now, of course, the media likes to get some excitement going, and it is interesting to see the article on the print edition alongside this. And I never asked where the change was made or why it was made. I just thought it was interesting. So 53% of modern Orthodox Jews believe that women should have expanded roles in the clergy. That number is a little bit overblown. I'll tell you why. And perhaps they got a strong reaction to that, which led to their framing it as fragmentation, which I think is also a little bit of an overstatement. So those two statements do kind of capture what's going on. I think they're both slight overstatements, and I will explain why momentarily. In a little bit. How are we doing? Okay. Just quickly, in terms of shul, I'm going to talk mainly about about synagogue policies and practices relating to women, but in terms of shul attendance and perceptions, so you might be interested to know how often men and women go to shul. And 84% of men go always or almost always Shabbat and Yom Tov morning, and 52% of women go, which is pretty high. I can tell you that it's the number on the left is much higher among Haredi men, and the number on the right is much lower among Haredi women. So one of the nice things about modern Orthodoxy, I think, is that there's more presence of both men and women in synagogue. We did ask a bunch of statements, which you'll see in the lower half of this slide, about just general attitudes towards the shul. Men and women are both comfortable following the services, women a little bit less. Going to shul is an important part of their life, or men and women a little bit less. They both feel welcome in shul, women a little bit less. And you can see the rest of the comments. But so for some of those items, the men's responses were maybe 10 percentage points more positive, but overall the responses were somewhat similar. So here's the list. We asked on the JOFA survey a year ago, we had about 20 shul policies and practices. We asked how important these are to you. Number one on that survey last year was that religious classes for women should be on an intellectual level generally equal to those offered to men. And it was again number one on this survey by a wide margin. It's what the women value most. These are the responses from by men and women combined. And as you can see, for most of these, there's favoring. Co-ed classes are favored by 80%, a women-friendly mechitza, 75%, Women should be eligible to be shul presidents, 75%. Women should be eligible to say Mourner's Kaddish or Birkat Gomel, even if no men are saying it, 69%. Divrei Torah from the pulpit, 65%. The only one that was under 50% was the Torah should pass through the women's section before and after reading the Torah. A follow-up question was, how satisfied are you with the policies and practices in place? This slide is what they favor. When we asked how satisfied they were, it was pretty much 50% plus or minus a few points for all of these. So there are a number of items that men and women support. And in terms of satisfaction, the glass is definitely half full and half empty. We then went on to what are your attitudes towards the role of women? Should women have the opportunity for expanded roles in organizational leadership? Strong support, 80%. Torah teaching, 75%. Torah study and scholarship, 75%. The clergy, 37%. If you combine the 37% fully agree and 16% agree somewhat, that's where the 53% came from. But somewhat, I agree somewhat. It's kind of, I don't know. I think that the starting point for conversation really should be the 37% that agree fully. You can see that it was 31% among men and 43% among women. So 37% agree fully that women should have the opportunity for expanded roles in the clergy. We then asked a follow-up question, which was, if these women are given expanded roles in the clergy, this was asked among people who agreed, how important is it to you that they also be given some sort of title signifying their rabbinic authority? Okay, so the question does not use the word rabbi. It does say rabbinic authority. Had we used different wording, I don't know what the wording would be, but I don't know to what extent using the wording rabbinic authority affects the rate. But we then looked at it this way. Let's look at the people that agree fully that women should have the opportunity for roles, and they also rated as very important that they have a title signifying rabbinic authority. That's the group that I would say are in favor of having women clergy, not rabbis, whether you call it rabbanit or maharat. They are okay, they support having women with those roles with a title, and that's 19%. That's 19%. If we look at those that agree fully or somewhat that women should have opportunity for roles in the clergy, and they rate it as very or somewhat important that they have a title, that's 19%. So I think we're really talking about somewhere between 19 and 38%, but really it's the 19% of the modern Orthodox Jews that feel that this is important at this time. And if you want to see how that 19% compares across groups, it's 14% of men feel that way, that women should be clergy with titles. 25% of women feel that way. 60% of open Orthodox, 33% of liberal modern Orthodox, and then much lower, only 4 to 2% at the right wing. So this, in fact, going from 60% open Orthodox supporting this to 2% right centrist. If we talk about an issue that polarizes the left versus the right in modern Orthodoxy, this is where the greatest dispersion occurs, because 60% of open Orthodox support this. They support women clergy with title compared to 14% of the rest of modern Orthodox. So we'll talk about a schism. That's where there's a split. If we combine the open Orthodox and the liberal modern Orthodox, then 42% support this versus 8% in the rest of modern Orthodoxy. So this is the issue that that most polarizes. So some of you may be familiar with the role of the Yoetzet Halacha. This is a woman trained as an expert in the laws of Taharat HaMishpacha, qualified to answer halachic questions. So it may well be that that the positive experiences in shuls and communities that have a yoetzet, that the positive experience in that they are really being used, and women in these communities that have among all women that have questions about the Harat Mishpacha, 60% of them, of the questions, are currently being asked of women, including the synagogue rabbi's wife or another woman on the shul clergy staff. So it could be that this is kind of has created a path for further acceptance of women as being competent to respond to questions. Okay, let's see. It's 8:15, so I'll just quickly go through a couple more things very, very quickly. We did ask about an important part of the survey was what are the most important problems facing modern Orthodoxy? We went through 27 separate issues and asked, are these a serious problem, somewhat a problem? Here in this chart, you can see the 10 most important problems. And number one was the cost of Jewish schooling. This was number one among men, among women, among younger, among people over 75, this was number one. So it may well be some of them are helping their children and grandchildren with tuitions, but there's wide perception of this being the problem. The number two problem is agunot, the status of agunot, trapped women who were unable to remarry because they have not received a get, a halachic divorce. These asterisks on the right are, I've kind of flagged key women-oriented issues. What I find most interesting about this chart is that 3 of the top 10 are kind of interpersonal relations. Number 3, people with inappropriate midot, inappropriate behaviors towards other people. Number 5, people dishonest in business. Number 7, people lacking love for others in the community. And I would say number 9, people feeling isolated. These are not halachic things necessarily, although they are to some extent, but they're more just how people behave with each other. So it's interesting that that these were judged as significant problems. So you can see what the other things we asked are. These are number 11 through 27. Number 13, the 13th biggest problem was rabbis opposed to increased women's roles at 32%. It's viewed as much more of a problem on the liberal left. And last on the list, at the very bottom of the list, rabbis advocating for increased women's roles. Only 7% view that as a problem, which may be because it's not happening enough. But okay. Looking at there's a whole section here on divorce and agunot, which you can look at. I mean, there has become growing awareness of the problem, and many people today would not accept the situation that people were accepting 20 or more years ago in areas like this growing awareness of the halachic prenuptial agreement, which the RCA has developed, and there are many rabbis who won't even do a wedding if the halachic prenup is not signed. So there is a growing awareness of the issue. And finally, we talked about the numbers the 27 problem areas. We do have in this report there is a sample of verbatim responses. Again, there's a document at the website that's 73 pages long that has many hundreds and hundreds of examples of what people were saying. So I don't have to read these because you can download the report. There is an appendix, which this is what the on the left, this is what the social research page at the website will look like, and you can see these are all articles relating to the this survey of the modern Orthodox community. This very last link at the bottom, JOFA webinar, if you click on this link, you will get this presentation. There's also some articles that you can take a look at at the Times of Israel. If you want to know about how we did the survey, the sample, and the topics, this is included in the appendix. We talk about Our goal in doing this, this study was sponsored by the Micah Foundation from the Hartford Springfield area. You can read about that in the report. You can read about the goals of the survey, the reliability. I don't want to get into inside baseball, but I did talk a little bit about our view that the survey is statistically reliable. You can see the spectrum of people that were involved in developing the survey questionnaire. There are other community leaders that helped us behind the scenes, and they all deserve a huge thanks. So thank you very much. That basically is what I wanted to cover tonight. Finally, just some of the other things that are in the report.
Okay, thank you so much, Mark. There are a couple of questions. One of the questions, you might want to go back to a slide or two, and one not. So
Okay.
the one that doesn't require slides came from our viewing audience, and that is, how did you define Orthodox? Like, was there some standard that the research project had for a person who was self-identifying as Orthodox? Did you use all the respondents, no matter if they seem to you like they really belong within Orthodoxy? People were puzzled by some of the responses. So that's the one that doesn't need the data. And then the one that does is, I wonder if you could talk briefly about age differences. You talked about differences by open Orthodox and liberal Orthodox and centrist and that whole spectrum. But I noticed that there was a big difference in the results for people who were under 35. They tended to respond quite differently than people who were closer to our ages. So I wonder if you could talk about both of those things, please.
Okay, so the first question is an excellent question. This gets asked all the time, and that is, how do we decide who's Orthodox? And there are a number of approaches. So one approach might be to ask some questions about the beliefs and practices, and then to categorize people as, I don't know if we can categorize them as Orthodox or not Orthodox, but we can categorize them as observant, more observant, less observant, etc. The general practice in research is self-identification. So this is what Pew does, and this is what we did. And we asked, are you Orthodox, conservative, or Reform, etc. And there are other categories as well. And if people say they are Orthodox, then we judge them as Orthodox. Are they Orthodox the way we all are? I think one of the things we've learned is that Orthodoxy is a spectrum. We're not all on the same page. Even within the more right-wing group, the percentage that have pure beliefs, that fully believe in the key tenets, is not 100%. It may be 95%. So for the purposes of this survey, and this is the way the Pew survey did it as well, and this is pretty much how every survey does it. When we deal with things like, we're doing a survey with the Orthodox community, we do want to make sure we're not getting people that are conservative, that view themselves as conservative, and they go to an Orthodox synagogue, but they view themselves as Orthodox. What this survey then tells us is that these are the things that those people believe or practice. In terms of ages, the full report has a lot of comparisons by age, and there are a lot of comparisons by age. I'll give you just a few examples. The question about how important is your Orthodox observance to you? If you look at it by age, you'll see that there's a middle age group of around 25 to 44 where it drops precipitously by 10 or 15 percentage points. So I gave this presentation last week at a shul, and somebody said, that doesn't surprise me. We're all stressed out. We're all freaking out. Our kids are going to high school or college. It's just that our Judaism is not as much fun. And that was my feeling as well. So that's one area where we saw a difference. Another area is that in areas of participation in shul and learning, it goes up with age. At 65 plus, 75 plus, there's a lot more attendance of shuls. People are looking for learning opportunities. There's a lot more interest in getting involved in Judaism, with more interest in getting involved in organization. Yes, it's true that among the youngers, among the 18 to 34, some of the metrics in terms of beliefs and practices were lower. When we looked at men putting on tefillin, it's lower among the young. When we looked at is tefillah, is prayer meaningful to you, 43% fully agreed, but it was quite a bit lower among the young. It was lower among the young. Even in things like Israel, some people were very surprised that the emotional connection to Israel is not uniform across ages. It's actually about 10 or 15 percentage points lower among the young, which has been described as worrisome to me. So there are differences by age. Every question in the survey was cut by age and gender and by those 5 groups. And there are many, many differences, which is why I think if you have the time to look at the survey, at the website there's a page where you can contact and ask questions. So you can always ask a question if you want to find out more.
So when you do a follow-up to this survey, I would suggest that another question that be asked is whether people have children. You heard it in the responses at the show when you presented. We found by looking at the Pew data that when people have children, they suddenly become invested in all kinds of things that they didn't think they. So that might be part of the 18 to 34 also.
Right. So we did ask if they have children. We know who has children. We asked if their children go to Orthodox day school, so we knew who to ask those questions. But also, I would also say that one of the questions we asked, which I did not talk about, is thinking of your oldest child over the age of 18, is that child more or less observant than you are? And the question is, will Orthodoxy continue to move to the right? And the answer was 33% of the children were more observant, 33% were less, and 33% were about the same, which was interesting. And we asked them to describe that. The descriptions are interesting. But what also was interesting is that those percentages do vary among the various groups within Orthodoxy. And among the more liberal groups, more of the children are less observant.
Okay, then. The last thing I wonder if you could talk about for just a couple of minutes is that interpretive bit. When you see one group that says they believe in something very much, and you have another group that believe in it a little or not at all. Then you have a group that say they believe in it somewhat. There were several slides you showed like that. So the question always is, where do you put the somewhats? Are you going to count them together with those who are advocates? Or are you going to count them with those who are not very fond of the idea? And I wonder, did you have additional criteria that led you to not consider their advocacy as very strong? Or were you just kind of caught it betwixt and between there?
Yeah, well, so for questions like belief and observance, I thought it made sense to have believe fully, tend to believe, especially with belief. I thought that was and whether or not you look at 74% believe fully Hashem created the world, or 90% believe fully or tend to believe, that's really kind of subjective as to who you want to call believers. Shabbat, strictly observant, 65% strictly. I don't know what mostly observant means, but I think if I was going to really make a decision as to whether somebody is Shomer Shabbat, if I was a rabbi, I might view it as the people that said I'm strictly observant, and I might view those who said mostly observant as kind of areas where they can work on that. In terms of shul policies and practices, we decided to make it simpler. We just asked them, are you in favor or not? So we didn't have fully in favor, somewhat in favor. Mm-hmm. Although in terms of the women clergy, it was strongly support, somewhat support. So the question is, if the choices are, I strongly support women in the clergy and I somewhat support, am I being fair to combine the two and say 53% support? Or am I really talking about the 37% that strongly support? That's subjective. I mean, in my view, I really prefer to look at the 37%. Someone saying I somewhat support that, to me, it just strikes me as half-hearted. But that the creation of these responses to questions like favor, belief, support, you kind of have to look at what it is you're trying to find out.
Well, we could probably go on all night, but we won't. So thank you so much. This was just fascinating, and we really appreciate your time. And everyone should now immediately download the report if they haven't done so, and read it and come to their own ideas of this report, which I think really illuminated areas that we had no hard information about before. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sylvia.